Hi, welcome to the XYChromies, Confidently Uncertain, a show where two Army vets turned renewable energy engineers talk veteran issues, science, history, engineering, geopolitics, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pearson Guest, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How's it going today, Richard?
I'm ready to rock and roll, Pearson.
Nice. Well, Nowruz Mubarak, as they say in Persian. It's the Persian New Year, kind of, today and a couple other days, the band, and it's episode 42. So that's what's happening. A quick recap. We talked about the three types of evolution. For our listeners who didn't listen last time, you can go ahead and check out the episode before. It's great. Also like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm going to forget later on in this episode to say those things. So let me get all that out of the way. Last time we talked about the three types of evolution. Do you remember what they were? And can you give us a quick recap?
They had to do with individual.
Yep, that's the third one.
Group
That's the fast one. Individual
and species.
Yeah. So genetic evolution, which is the slow one. So these are all in the context of different bands of time. If there's slow exogenous effects occurring, then we can genetically evolve over a number of generations to deal with to adapt to the changing environment. If the environment is changing fast, we use our social and cultural evolution to fill in the gaps. This could be, in the past, these were like churches and old educational institutions, and now, we have a lot of different types of institutions that should help retain, preserve, and pass on knowledge as a group to adapt to the time. And then if it's really fast, then you have to rely on the individual. And that's because traditions and institutions are still, they're bogged down by the slowing glue of bureaucracy and other, so they can be slow to change. They lean heavily on the past and ritual and what we're familiar with. And when things are changing rapidly, those aren't necessarily the best tools to deal with a dynamic delta. So it requires the individual to change. And so
Those three types of evolution sort of speak to this idea that individuals might make rapid change to confront an environmental situation, and there's a communication between what that individual can find or create or establish with the larger order of a group or a civilization. But the main idea behind all of this is that there is bilateral communication between individual and group, but that we're usually offloading individual knowledge into a cultural subset of knowledge for that location, that people in that location to survive the best.
this is a really good point. Me and my wife, Sarah, were talking about this recently, and it's funny you brought that up. For the audience who didn't understand what Richard said there, although I thought it was well said, the idea that when we say these people discovered this thing, or these people invented this thing, or these people discovered that thing, a lot of times what that typically means is maybe one person who was curious in the tribe either did something stupid or made a mistake and therefore came upon some new type of thing, or they did an experiment, right? They were curious. They exhibited some of these different types of behaviors, might have discovered something, and then, the rest of the group who they adopt the new technology or the new science that's been discovered or figured out, right? The reason this came up is there was a recent video. I haven't sent it to you. I haven't even watched it, but I got a summary of it from somebody else, a different video, of course, that was talking about how algorithms were killing curiosity because people were getting used to being fed a steady stream of, whatever cat videos or sports videos or, they're coming for your guns videos, whatever people get fed, right, depending on their algorithmic leanings. And so it got me and my wife talking kind of like, oh, do you think because he was saying this was killing curiosity in humans. And as someone who curates a lot of my own material, and, I will take suggestions from the algorithm, but I am by no means, most of my content is not being fed to me through algorithms. Even my social media is Reddit, which, I like very much because I can curate the subs, those channels that I would like to look at and get content from, and not just get a general feed from, I guess, r/popular, right? Um, so that was kind of the setup for, I guess the general question is, I thought, are people, I asked my wife, I was like, do you think people are losing their curiosity? Or do you think that there's just a general group of people that aren't very curious naturally? And maybe like they're just, of course, they just want to be fed the algorithms. These are the same people who had no problem plopping down and watching sports every night, right? And drinking a couple beers to decompress. Generally not curious people at all. And so that was the question I posed to her because I thought it was interesting.
Well, how did she respond?
She agreed with my point that I thought generally I don't think there's probably a large subset of people that just aren't very curious. And I don't think necessarily algorithms are killing people who are curious's curiosity. I think if people who are curious, they remain curious. I have never met someone who was inquisitive and curious before, who didn't stay so. Maybe in their older age, if you become more calcified and less dynamic in your thinking. But Benjamin Franklin is famously a curious person, right?
Right.
I think a funny story that I hear about Benjamin Franklin, he didn't really invent all this stuff that he gets credit for inventing, but
Right.
what would happen was he really was social up until his 80s. He lived a long time. And people would be inventing things and he would talk to them and he'd be like, oh, cool. Are you going to do anything with that? Are you going to do anything with that? And they'd be like, oh, no, I don't. Like the bifocal. Are you going to do anything with that? It's like, oh, no, I don't care. I just use it for whatever. He's like, great. Would you mind if I did? He would ask them, like, if he could steal their idea. He wasn't stealing. He was asking if he could have their idea and, sell it or whatever. He was generally regarded as a curious person until he died. So that was kind of my thought. I don't know. How about you? What do you think?
Uh, I have a couple of things to comment on, and that is a lot of time. A lot of time. So our language does this thing that's uh, convoluting, and so the language that we use suggests that there is either a curious person or a not curious person, and that the sorting hat will put us into one of those two binary
Yeah.
groups. And I'm pretty sure that there's no such thing as two separate groups. I'm pretty sure there's a spectrum between a person who is really not interested in self-reflection, really not interested in problem solving, like that, whatever it is about them, they're going to tolerate pretty terrible conditions for a long time.
Yeah.
On the other end of the spectrum, you got me, who's um, radically intolerant. I cannot stand a situation. If I do something and I have to repeat that thing a couple of times, I'm looking for ways to automate or combine so that thing that I'm doing gets taken care of on its own. I don't want to do a thing 3 times in a row. Like that's
So people
I'm
who are
very intolerant.
agitated by things not working the way that they should
Yeah.
might be basically it's almost like forced into being curious because you're like, well, I need to find a solution, right? And
Yeah.
like the current
Yeah.
solutions that are available are not doing the trick. I like that. So
Right.
curiosity through general discomfort of repeating the same mundane task over and over again.
Or anything.
Yeah.
I I'll give I want to talk about Mike Bechtel, the chief futurist at Deloitte Consulting. He gave a
I'm familiar with
speech
Deloitte.
at South by Southwest. I'm gonna get to him in a second because he gives a milquetoast boring presentation on something I'm actually really passionate about.
I hate that. I hate when someone is like, you see a lecture, and you're like, this is gonna be fascinating. Then you log in, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh my
Like,
god, dude.
do I want to recommend this? Because come on, this is actually really boring. But I'll come back to this idea. So a couple of examples, like I hadn't been in the army very long, maybe just a couple of weeks before I realized, oh, this is actually the unit that I was in was just filled with people who tolerated a lot of suffering. They complained about it all the time. I mean, they
Oh,
were definitely they're very willing to vocalize how bad it was, and completely unwilling, at least to my impression, to do anything about it.
yeah,
And that was from, I mean, you could stand in one place and do a circle and point to dozens of things wherever you were in that paradigm, in that duty station,
sure.
and say, oh, well, there's something that could be improved. There's something that could be improved, right? And I turned 18 in basic training, so I was a pretty young guy.
Oh God, you were one of
And
those. You were really young
yeah,
coming in.
I
Like,
was.
yeah.
What I love is how my progressive friends will say you were a child soldier, and I'm like, 17-year-olds don't think that they're children.
They're they're doing everything in their power at base. They're saying everything in their power basic to prove to the men, the adult men there,
Yeah,
that they
totally.
aren't babies. They're talking about all of the beer they've drank potentially
Yeah,
already,
totally.
like the 3 times they got drunk already, and uh, the girl they hooked
30,
up with.
totally. 37-year-old people think that 17-year-olds are children, but 17-year-olds don't think that they're children.
I was
So I,
25 and I thought those 17-year-olds were children. And I look at my 25-year-old self as an idiot child too. Now looking back, I'm like, that guy was an idiot. You got married 2 years later, like a fucking moron.
yeah.
Like, God. Yeah.
Well, it's all it's all perspective. Anyway, so I had been at my first duty station for a couple of weeks, and we went on a you maybe had the same or maybe a different terminology for this. If you went into the training area and performed maneuvers with whatever your MOS was, we called it a field problem.
Hmm.
And it's a camping trip where you take really expensive machinery out into the wilderness. If it is a shooting piece of machinery, you shoot it while you're out there,
Hmm.
and you do all the things that you would expect to be part of the soldier's manual of common tasks around that camping trip.
Yeah.
So this is where you get to eat your MREs. This is where you get to poop in the wilderness. This is where you get to dig a bunch of holes and fill them back in again. A lot of fun. And so one of the first things that one of the first jobs that I did as a field artillery cannoneer was not shoot the howitzer. That's for the big boys. That you don't get it up into that howitzer. And in the 1990s, we were self-reflective as a people about the inside of the howitzer being the White House.
Because it was
There's a
so
lot
hard
of
to get access to it.
yeah, there was a lot of there was, shall we say, race and class distinctions that were playing out there. Anyway, so the first job that I had as a young cannoneer was advanced party gun guide. And the main idea behind this is that an advanced party gun guide goes to a forward location where the howitzer is going to go to, and they
Hmm.
don't do it alone. They do it with a squad of other soldiers who have the same exact job, but for a different howitzer in the unit. There is um, a staff sergeant, an E6. We call them gunny, not to be confused with the gunnery sergeant of the Marine Corps. There's a staff sergeant and a lieutenant. And so those two have the perspective and task of aligning the battery, the gun battery, the howitzers in this gun battery, to align them towards a specific objective.
Okay.
So a a, a forward target. And the gun guides, our job is to set up landline communication with a wire with a telephone and a wire, and to go to a position where the gun is going, the driver of the howitzer is going to go to, and then we're going to show them what direction they need to point everything. Right. So
Okay.
there's this the simple theory of artillery is if you know two things, if you know where your howitzer is sitting on the planet and you know where the target is on the planet, everything else is trigonometry, and so it's simple
Yeah.
physics that you and I learn in college. Well, the lieutenant went to college, thankfully, and so they know how to do this. And so the this is all very, the details that one needs for this seems to be pretty limited, But for the actual person doing the job of gun guide, it turns out the specific equipment is meaningful and important. And so I'm a scrawny 150-pound 18-year-old, and they handed me 300 pounds of equipment that I was supposed to carry out to this open field in Kansas somewhere. And, think about the ranges that we're working with in football fields. Like, okay, gun one, you're going to go over there. Gun two, you're going to go over there. Gun three, and so on and so forth. And this was multiple football field distances that we would have to march around in the wilderness to go do this. Carrying this ridiculous amount of gear, and this ridiculous amount of gear was all contained in a gunny sack. When we got to the location where the lieutenant told us to go to, we would dump out the gunny sack. Right, it's a pile. It's a pile of treasure.
Yeah.
We would sort through all the treasure, find the wire spool, walk back to where the lieutenant and the sergeant were. All of us, young, pathetic people, had to connect all of our little wires together, and then go back out to where we had set up our gunny sack and our pile of treasure, and then try to get communications. And
Jeez.
so we might walk back and forth from where the lieutenant and sergeant were to our guns location where the howitzer was going to be
like
set up.
half a dozen
4
times or something. Yeah, 5 times. Jeez.
Because if there was no communication, we had to go up and check it out. Right? There's this whole problem. So I did this one time, and I realized my first most extreme and vivid buyer's remorse. I mean, I really felt like I had chosen badly.
Yeah.
This was bad. It was intolerable to me. And so I went to the gunnery sergeant. This is a staff sergeant, E6. And I said, "Hey, Gunny, about the equipment that we use, what do you think about, I don't know, maybe reviewing that?" And, I was in high school 6 months earlier. Like, this is a new thing for me entirely to be talking to this supervisor, because that was so bad, and I just had to do something about it. And he says, "Hey, Private, you do whatever you'd like, but it has to all be the same. Every one of you have to have the same equipment across all 4 howitzer sections, and you better check in with your chief to make sure that he is going to let you do that." I said, "Yes, Sergeant, you got it." Because that's one of the adaptive qualities of fawning, is that you convince dangerous people to tolerate you.
Yeah.
So I did this whole project.
I like the idea. I'm sorry, just real quick. I like that he's all like, "Oh, this motherfucker. This is going to be fun to watch." In his head, he's thinking this is going to be fun to watch. He's like, either way, he's going to figure something out. Most likely he's going to crash and burn. I'm here for it no matter what, because I'm a staff sergeant. What is this, AIT? Still, this is your...
No, this is at my first duty station in Kansas.
Oh, this is at your duty station. Okay, so you're actually learning your real job now, as opposed to like being in basic training where you're... okay, so this is good.
I've gone through basic. I've gone through AIT. I'm actually stationed now.
Okay, and you're learning your real job now from AIT. Gotcha. All right.
So I get this great input from him that everything has to be the same, and I think in some other, maybe a different conversation, I'll just go through this whole process. But essentially what I set out to do was to take every piece of kit that was in that gunny sack that was 300 pounds and reduce its weight as much as possible. I didn't have the project management brain that I have now. I just knew that things had to change.
Yeah.
And so the new equipment was a pack frame. Everything was, what I came to learn later in life was 5S, or lean manufacturing. It's all on the outside. It's visible to anyone who sees it. Everything is made of lighter materials, but not only that, it folds down into a smaller compartment. But the central feature of the entire thing was I never wanted to walk back to that aiming circle where the lieutenant was again. Once I walked out to my gun emplacement, I wanted that to be it. I wanted to go out there and
So
stop.
you wanted to like put a spool on your, like just have the spool running when you go out there the first time. Like it was crazy to
You
go
nailed
out
it.
there and then
Yeah,
bring the spool back and then go back. It's like,
yeah,
can I just, while I'm going out there, the originally the spool's
yeah,
just running behind me at least? Like, geez.
yeah. It totally became that thing. And so
Yeah.
the field telephone and the spool were the central part of the design. It's in a pack frame. And so we would jump off the truck now, and each of my other buddies there, the other gun guides from the other gun sections, I would help them put everything together. We would tie it off to a stake because that was a central feature of the entire kit was
Yeah.
that it was easy to get a hammer and stake out. And I came up with a couple of, I was learning how things fit together in hardware and how that connected. And so I tied everything off, and then I would say, all right, gun one, take off. Gun three, you're good to, because I was gun two. Gun four, you're all set. And then we would just walk toward our positions
Yeah.
once, and we could test our telephone before we even began walking because we were connected
You already
together.
connected. Yeah. So it was like,
Yeah,
oh
so
yeah,
we
it's working, and then you guys could walk and then check like
totally
every 100 feet or whatever, and be like, hey, are we
whatever
still?
you want.
Yeah,
But we could totally get to our point of operation, our area of responsibility, and the first highest priority to the lieutenant and gunny was to have wire communication with the gun guides and eventually the howitzers, because we would switch over that wire to the howitzer once the gun showed up. So what used to take this like hours, it was hours and hours, suddenly became a 15-minute proposition.
yeah.
We would literally go out with the spool of wire trailing behind us, confirmed already that it worked, follow up with another call when we got to our location. We already had our azimuth, so we would set up a couple of stakes to make sure that was set. And then the lieutenant would look at each of us with the aiming circle. It's a survey instrument, and then we were done. And I tell this story because I want to communicate just how intolerable it is to me to suffer through a series of steps that you have to do multiple times, that every time it's just another difficult barrage of pain and suffering.
Well, and backtracking specifically has got to be one of the most
Oh,
infuriating things.
oh,
Naturally, in human, like
yeah.
you
It's
take the wrong
demoralizing.
turn, you drive past, you miss the turn by a bunch. You're upset. You have to drive.
Yeah.
You have to find a way to turn her back around, and now you're
Yeah.
coming from the opposite way. Um,
Totally.
Land navigation shit, yeah. You go the wrong way, you have to retread your steps. Yeah, this
Yeah.
anybody who plays video games, any of our listeners who play video games understand a game that makes you backtrack through a place you just went and there's
Yeah.
nothing to do.
Yeah.
You can listen to gamers bitch all day and long about that shit too. People hate to backtrack, so I'm totally
Yeah.
right there with you. It's an insufferable proposition most of the time, unless yeah.
That little enterprise got me some notoriety and an improved position in the unit, and I'll talk about that some other time.
Yeah.
But it's a story that talks about, like, this was not the last time that I encountered a new part to my job, was insulted by how difficult it was to do, and it had to be repeated over and over again. And so I changed something major about it, and it continued to it continued to benefit me to have that attitude. But I'm really on the hypersensitive end of my continuum, that is um, curious or sensitive or low tolerance for what is otherwise basically suffering in some way.
The
It's
status
it's not
quo.
having, yeah, it's not having, your fingernails being pulled out of your fingers. It's not that, but it's
No.
torture in a different way that a sensitive person like me cannot stand. And so I think that I'm going to return back to Mike Bechtel here in a second. I think that that's like, there are people kind of in the middle of that bell curve, if you want to use that as a way to describe the spectrum, who are like, yeah, I would love a solution to this. But, my background, my station in life, the amount of free time that I have, whatever it is, they sort of lack the intensity around it, how
Yeah.
bad something is to move them. So Mike Bechtel is this chief futurist at Deloitte Consulting, and like I said, it was kind of kind of a low energy hour of presentation,
God, who knew
he
the
talks
future was
about
so boring? No, I'm just
but what he talks about is he really summarizes it very well. He says a lot of people are rewarded in their careers for being an I type person. So they have a depth of knowledge in a subject matter. So an I type is going to have a depth of knowledge. They've really studied their field. If they're an electrical engineer, boy, they know everything about the National Electric Code. They've just really got this great grasp of what it means to design a electric circuit, a power circuit, an electronic circuit, whatever it is. Okay. A T-shaped professional has an I component, but they really know how to broadly apply what they do. And that means that there's probably a social component to what they do. And they might very well be talking to other professionals or other people in adjacent or even different fields and kind of comparing notes. And
yeah.
then the X-shaped professional is someone who probably they dabbled in a couple of things that they became good enough at that they could move on from.
And then got
That they
into
gave
porn. No, I'm joking.
thank you. I see what you did
I
there.
couldn't help. Okay,
Um,
go ahead. Yeah.
they so they only committed 5 hours a week to learning something new,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of moved on once they got
A
a
taste.
good enough grasp. Yeah, they
Yeah.
got grasp of what it could do. But their X quality had a lot to do with how they really always were biased towards they want to go to the faculty dining hall and sit with faculty in a totally different department every time they had lunch, and then get into a conversation with them like, well, what are you researching in your okay, so you're the math department, what are you guys studying? Get over here
The
to
tourist.
yeah, they want to exactly they if you want to draw the pollinator analogy, like they are a hummingbird or a butterfly or a bee, they're going to all the different flowers. And so the central thesis of his, and it says in the title on the YouTube video, breadth is the new depth, where the future favors learn it alls over know it all. And so
Hmm.
this really speaks to me because like I wasn't none of these things at 18 when I'm fixing this problem with my advanced party equipment, but that was a really important formative experience from which I've built my entire career on. I mean, we have a lineage that goes back to that
Yeah.
suggests asking a few people for their input into this because I got those gun guides together and said, oh, guys, we got to fix this. I want to make something that you guys don't mind using, that you like to use. I want your input. We're going to make it lighter. We're going to make it faster.
Yeah.
And they were on board with it because they've been suffering with this for months.
Yeah.
I was
Like this
new. I was
sucks.
very new.
Yeah.
Totally. So they were motivated, but they were somewhere in the middle of that bell curve where as long as someone else was willing to stick their neck out with this, they were willing to go along.
Sure. Oh,
And
you're
I
describing.
think
Oh, wow. Most of human nature, right? Like literally, it takes
totally.
like the people would build. They're unhappy, but they're not unhappy enough to do anything individually unless they
Yeah.
see someone dip their toe into the water. Yeah, of course. Uh, I'm thinking of all those percentages people put. Like, oh, 20% of people do this, 80% of people.
Yeah.
We hear these all the time.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why these metrics, and of course they're always changing, and whatever the percentages are changing. But
Right.
the general theme is what you're describing, which is like, yeah, and that goes in the line of that spectrum of curiosity, right? There's probably people who are right there in the line, and I would say that those eye professionals, they're SMEs, right? Subject matter experts.
Yeah.
Anybody who's I work for an engineering consulting firm. We have a couple in my team, right? These are the guys who they really get off on knowing everything within their
Yeah.
specific field, and they've studied it for 20 plus years. Typically, I would say a subject matter expert usually has to have about 20 years of experience within their field, and I mean at least. You can tell as a 3-year engineer when I talk to them. Like if you talk to someone who's been doing it for 15 and you talk to someone who's been doing it for 25, you can start to really even tell the difference from that band just by their breadth of knowledge. even those guys eventually they'll start to know the mechanical engineering jobs too because they've worked so long within their field. Even if they didn't want to learn it, they're just kind of like, well, I need to know about generators and turbines and stuff anyways. So yeah, the subject matter expert. Personally, when I think of studying the same subject for 10, 20 years, I would have a meltdown. Like it's absolutely the most terrifying thing you could ever make me do is like, oh, you're going to focus on this one thing. I don't know if anything has ever made me that interested in one thing ever. I I probably fall far along the lines of an X or a whatever a
T-shaped professional.
a T-shaped professional. Which is evident in our podcast. I mean, shit, we talk about a lot of different stuff. So, it's funny, I guess maybe the X, I always feel like it's about finding how everything connects. Right. And I think that might be totally the appeal there if I was to just guess where he was going with it, because, I want to know about a lot of different little things and just how they all kind of fit together. And I don't need to know a ton. I'll try to figure out as much as I need to know in that thing so that I can make sense of the puzzle I'm trying to solve. Like, oh, does that piece go here? And then I can be wrong about it too as I learn about other things and stuff. But yeah, I would say I like to know like the big grand strategy of what we're looking at and stuff.
Yeah.
So
there's
that's
a
great.
terminology that kept showing up in some of the stuff I was listening to this week was stuff you sent me. I've been impoverishing you by not sending anything back. I'm going to change that by the end of the day. I'll send you a bunch of stuff.
Appreciate it.
But there's this notion that comes up in some of this material called the North Star. By the way, I'm filling out my my annual performance evaluation. We skipped it for the past 3 years. So my supervisor is supposed to sit down with me and say, "Tell me what you think you've done. Tell me if you think that what you've been doing is working towards a goal. What is that goal?" Right? It's that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Yes, we do this every year.
Except the last 3.
Yeah, I do this every year with my boss. Yes. So just give yourself 3 A's in a row now with a plus, and be like, well, this is how I think I did, a triple A plus, because you missed the last 3, and then give her just an A for procrastinating the 3 times. She gets 3 A's, but no, just mess around.
My supervisor, I literally I hired her. I chose her from a subset of people who applied for a position, and it's so unusual in your professional life to pick your supervisor. That's a radical. I mean, that's wild idea, right? And they tell people this, they go, "What are you talking about?" But when I chose her, I didn't choose a person who came across as a micromanager. I chose someone who would be pretty laissez-faire when it came to my day-to-day activities, but would work with me on long-term stuff.
Yeah.
Which turns out to be a wonderful arrangement. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up, I'm filling this thing out. It's just a standard form. It's in a Word document, so I can put as much information as I want to in between each question.
Okay.
You work for the university. What do you do for your job? That kind of thing. And then it says, by the way, for our audience, you are so lucky. I did not open that document up. I am not going to read from it. I am not going to read to you what I wrote down to this document, because that is self-serving for everybody. But the question that basically gets around, so what things have you produced? Describe what you're producing.
Yeah.
And that's where I say, oh, well, I fixed this thing, and I
procured this.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And the things that are in there are stuff like, the last couple of years I bought some capital asset tools for a machine shop and that kind of stuff, So I had to write the proposals. And at the end of this, I realized that there is a new subsection that goes into my answer to that question, which is, what are the things that I'm actually passing along to our students? Because my contact time with them is, let's just say it like this. If you are listening to this program and you are a laboratory technician at a university, you and I are not the same. And it's not because I think I'm better than you. It's because my university might be badly organized and puts entirely too much emphasis on my contact time with the students because they're not getting the same contact time with their faculty, which they actually need. We don't have graduate students. We don't have assistant professors who are trying to build up rank and get promotions.
There's not
We
enough
don't have
professors there. I mean, the
period.
professors, you don't see them because they're always in a class. You don't see them outside of a class, or
No.
they're grading crap tons of work because they probably have way too many classes because half the professors are adjunct professors, and
Yep.
they might not even be in the same state.
And with regard to the adjunct faculty, they're tremendous and great and everything, and I have all these great positive things to say about them. And we don't pay them the release time to spend time with our students. So
We
we don't
barely pay them
compensate
the
them.
time to spend that they do spend. Our
Exactly.
adjunct professors were paid disturbingly low amounts, I have to say. When I saw how much they got paid quarterly, I was like,
Yes.
what's the point? You already work as an engineer. Just get a second engineering job, consult on the side for the love of God. They really had to have a passion for wanting to teach because, geez,
Yeah.
you know,
And so so here's the inherent problem when I say we are not the same. I'm actually a terrible technician. Actually really bad at that.
because it's not your singular focus. It's like 25% of what you're doing right now,
Yeah,
basically. Yeah.
maybe at best, because we'll talk. I'll meet with my supervisor and she'll say, "Well, have you worked on X, Y, or Z?" And I'll say, "Well, no, I haven't." And then she's like, "Okay, well, you got to work on that thing." And I said, "Yeah, it's on my list of to dos and stuff." But so I wrote down this list of things that are skills that I've transferred to our students. And what do they range from? They range from, oh, I taught this group of students how to weld.
Yeah.
We have a welding course requirement in the program, the mechanical department, and the programs within the mechanical engineering department, and we're post COVID. Most of the students who took the welding class did it online. They never touched a welder. And of course they're saying to me, I find this, they're disturbed by this. They think it's a terrible miscarriage of their education to not touch a welder.
It is.
So yeah. So I said, well, I'll show you how to do it. I'm a farmer, for goodness sakes. I'm not a welder. And I tell them, this is what we're going to do. This is the limits of what we're going to cut. Anyway, so I'm spending this contact time with our students, teaching them how to weld, how to use electronics instrumentation, right? There's a lot of people that don't know how to measure current with a multimeter because
Yeah.
it's not intuitive. If current wasn't intuitive to them in their coursework, then they take their multimeter out and they try to measure it like they would measure anything else. Doesn't work, right? That's not how it's done. So I'm teaching them how to use their instrumentation, teaching them how to use design tools. Like I spend hours and hours a term with our students teaching them literally this is how you create something.
Fusion
Yeah,
360. I mean, yeah.
exactly.
You taught me how to use Fusion 360 and AutoCAD, the 3D modeling software for that AutoCAD. Autodesk has in their portfolio, a really great program.
Absolutely.
And you managed to make me be able to create like a renewable energy device that I designed, which
Totally.
within a summer, which was pretty cool. That you were able to walk me through that. I went from I think the first project you helped me with was a planter um,
Hmm.
for
We learned how to make boards in 3D modeling.
yeah, boards and invisible boards, so I could do like the cool because I was making an instruction manual, I think, of how to put a planter together, which was really fun. That
Yeah.
was a great project. God, technical writing, one of the low key. If there's ever a class you should try to overwork yourself and do more, that's the class to do it. You will
Yeah.
get the most out of it. I learned how to, learned how to design Fusion 360 in Fusion 360 for that project, and yeah, some of my best work came out of technical writing. So
Totally. Yeah. I teach our students not only the design stuff, I also teach them how to use Microsoft Word because if you don't actually get that if your technical writing professor doesn't cover global formatting, then you just fight the program, right? You've probably seen the difference.
yeah, what's that
I'm
paragraph
giving this.
button up there? Where's that? There's that P with the two lines. If you're ever in a technical writing course and you don't know what that P is for, ask your teacher about that. She
Yeah.
should be using it a lot in front of you while she teaches you how to use Word, at least if that's part of the curriculum. So, anyways,
So I just wanted to express that short range of things I talked about from material fabrication to design to instrumentation to like
Yeah.
uh, skills around when I talk about using writing software, like that's a liberal arts skill, but our engineering majors need to know how to do it. This is ridiculous. This is the I'm actually making a case that I'm doing too much and I have to stop. And
Or
that's the central thrust of this whole thing.
double down and start Richard's non-accredited school for getting shit done, right? Like, I mean,
But that's
I have to say, college is it's out of favor. It is passé with the new regime. They just killed the Department of Education like between our
yeah.
last session. So if there's ever a time to low key, it might be. Sarah's been saying when I tell her all these historical stories from Casa Grande and Jurgen and all the other people that we've what's the guy from Guns, Nerds, and Steel and all these people,
Jared Diamond
and the mini Sarah MC Payne. So I tell her all these stories because they're really fascinating about Mao and Lawrence of Arabia and all this stuff. And she's like, you'd be a good history teacher. And I was like, yeah. And when our education system in the apocalypse happens, and we need to be teaching our kids stuff, maybe I'll be teaching history, because, and engineering and a bunch of other things. I was like, yeah, we'll have to start our impromptu getting it done school when college institutions aren't getting it cut anymore.
Well, part of why Mike Bechtel's presentation spoke to me is I've just laid out my case.
Yeah.
So it turns out that what I have found myself doing, despite the fact that that's not my actual job, my job is fixing things and making sure stuff, is up to date, that kind of stuff. Like that's an easy job to do.
You're basically the O&M manager, operations maintenance manager, and that's a high position. I say that because in hydropower systems they usually have an O&M manager, and this person basically makes sure the dam is operating, and a lot of that is getting people trained up on the technology who are new, getting them associated with the new technology they've procured because they're constantly procuring stuff to replace it and stuff like that, software, PLCs to remote IOs, blah, 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 new switch gears, so on and so forth, getting people hired, getting people retired, all of that. So you're managing personnel, you're managing equipment procurement, you're onboarding people, you're offboarding people. There's a lot into an O&M, operations and maintenance manager. So a lot of what it sounds like you're doing is that on top of like a lab tech position as well, so.
And what's true about this is that I gravitate towards the things where I'm teaching people how to do what they want to learn. That's interesting to them. They're motivated to learn it. And it's a skill it feels incidental to me.
Yeah.
But it turns out that it's actually
central.
It's actually valuable in ways that even I find hard to articulate, knowing full well that the workforce that they're going into is going to be like what Mike is talking about in this lecture, because they're going to encounter problems that even if we had our dream departments, like the faculty in our academic departments were not only subject matter experts, but also kind of had that range of understanding of how their knowledge applies.
We had like a bunch of Dr. Corsairs,
totally.
who like thought about the meta of teaching and like, hey, I'm going to teach around Google and modern technology. I'm sure if she was still teaching at OIT, she would have embraced AI and tried to incorporate it into her teaching curriculum in a very clever way. She might even have tests using GPT or Gemini, right? This is a professor that
talk about the ethics of it too.
Absolutely, yeah. She'd probably devise a clever scheme that would make it cheat proof, but it would encourage using AI somehow. She's very good at that stuff.
Totally.
Her Google tests were no joke.
So if we had those ideal academic departments, even they would still be constrained by the time that they have to deliver the curriculum that they have to limit themselves to. Because we can't have 10,000 credit hour bachelor degree programs.
Yeah.
Right? We have to try to pare those down.
OIT sure tried to. They gave it their best shot. I think what my degree was, I should have got a master's for just my bachelor's degree and the amount of credits I had to take for that damn thing.
So I know that they're not getting that ideal, amount of contact time with faculty and contact time with the material and practicums and lab times that are really well fleshed out. So it's important to me that the people I have contact with at college are taking with them skills that, when I say this is actually what matters, they don't teach you that this in the coursework. They have to deliver a subject matter to you. But what we never teach is not how to operate a piece of machinery in the machine shop. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the most important value-added skill that engineers have, which is discretion, which is judgment around what they actually do and what they set aside or delegate to someone else. And that's the part of what Mike didn't get into, which is this idea that in order to be an X-shaped professional and have this sense of how things come together and actually produce newer novel things or better opportunities or better systems, is that you have to spend a lot of time interacting with people that have overlap. Their skill sets are overlapping in some way, but have these ideal like blind spots or openings, so that when they get together, they knit together this even better team, because this person knows so much about this discrete area of electronics. This person knows so much about this discrete area of material science. You get together, oh, now they're producing, capacitive touch screens, or and he uses he talks about the origins of the GPS, like people getting together from wildly different departments at a university and then talking together in the dining facility. So I've gone down this path and talked about myself a little bit in service of this idea that something that you and I are talking about recently is that when we're looking at a civilization like ours that is beginning to
reshuffle.
Yeah, there's
little
the deck chairs of the Titanic are being moved around. And so I worry that what comes out at the end is going to be less equitable, that equality will be negatively impacted, that opportunity for people will be shifted around in a way that is specifically about disempowerment of specific groups of people, about making their lives harder, about all these different things that I thought that the American project was about striving towards more equity, more access. But what we're seeing is a real intentional move to make all of this contingent and transactional. And when I say contingent and transactional, I'm thinking like, this is what I describe my family as. So when I see it happening in our federal system, it really bothers me, because I didn't like the transactional and contingent family system. That means it's going to actually really negatively impact a lot of Americans.
Well,
so
and
what I'm talking about,
I'm sorry, if I may, it's more than just transactional. It's transactional like the mob is transactional. And
right.
The distinction there.
Have you brought me a gift? Are you bringing fealty and loyalty
right now?
If you're not,
this
right
is
now.
The difference is right now, whenever I'm talking to you. And I don't remember last time we talked. You'll remind me it was a week ago, right? But I forgot already. I'm like, no, that was a week ago. That was a different transaction. This is a new transaction. I don't remember that because I'm the one in power and I want more. That is where we're at right now. It's not only that, it's like, ooh, what, you did pay me already? Oh, that's weird. I saw Lutnick, I forget his secretary of assholeness and finance or some shit. I don't know, but he's a cabinet member of Trump's, who he went on the All In podcast with a bunch of technocrat asshole billionaires who are raping and pillaging us of our money as well. They're all friends of Elon Musk. They're all Nazis. So I'm gonna just start calling all of these people what they are. There's an Indian Nazi in there too. So equal opportunity. It's about class, not race. I mean, it is if you're low class, then it is about your race. But if you have enough money, you could be Kanye too. Kanye really is a visionary. I will say this. He's really trying to get ahead of that Nazi movement. He really has. It's incredible. Maybe he is a genius. He saw it coming and he's like, no, I'm going to make sure people know I'm a freaking Nazi so that, I'm on that team. Anyways.
He really did.
He really did.
None dare call him a sellout.
He is an original, I will say. Anyways, so he's talking to all these Nazis are all talking together, and the financial Nazi was saying something about like, if my grandma who's 96 or his mom is 96, if she doesn't get her Social Security check next month, she won't complain. She'll just be like, oh, it was a mistake and move on, and she'll just expect to get the next one, and it'll be no big deal. And anyone who does complain about not getting it is committing fraud.
Right.
Which is, I'm just going to let that hang there because it's such an incredible statement to make to people who have paid their entire life into a system to create a safety net for themselves. And to tell them that it's fraud to ask for the money that they paid into a system to get it back it's an incredible statement that a very inhumane person would make mention of. So yeah, it is like the mob. One of the things that was interesting that you were talking about, breadth, not depth.
Yeah.
I talked about this with you a couple of years ago, and about the renewable energy engineering degree specifically being a really nice degree going into the future. And I think that it's because there's cycles of this. And I think I mentioned this before. I think there are cycles where we need specialization, and we're leaving one of those cycles. Like maybe the last 40 to 60 years was that of specialization within at least engineering fields. Like we'd have, mechanical, electrical, this. And that was because we've had a lot of technological progress in the semiconductor and a bunch of other technologies, from inverters and different types of power electronic converters, cycloconverters, rectifiers, inverters. We've developed these systems more and more. We've developed the mechanical engineering aspect of things, and so much more that specialization was really needed. And now we're entering a time where these technologies are being merged together or integrated or being put together in packages or modules where, if you get a battery system, you're not ordering batteries anymore. I want my battery management system. I want my battery charger in there. I want the built-in battery inverter system. All of this needs to be in-house in a compartment, and a power panel that comes along with, a megawatt worth of power. And that needs to be able to hook to, an EV charging system, and it needs to be able to hook up to the grid, and it needs to be able to integrate with solar potentially, right? And there's a myriad of different, or methane capture, or a myriad of different technologies, or switch the batteries out for hydrogen and a hydrogen fuel cell that's got from methane capture. The point is that I saw, similarly to this guy, that I was right. That was the point. No, the point was like, I did see that we would need to have more of a breadth of knowledge to get things to connect. And I don't think that discounts the idea that we still need specialists. And I think what's great is that people do have a spectrum of curiosity. I noticed right away, if you wanted to know the biggest difference between renewable energy engineers and electrical engineers specifically, the electrical engineers would say expertise in electrical engineering, most likely, but they would be wrong. The biggest difference was social capacity, or the willingness to engage socially with people, is the biggest difference between renewable energy engineers and electrical engineers. That and 36 electrical engineering credits, really, at the end of the day. So that was really interesting to me. And you could tell this because a lot of classes, as a renewable energy engineer, you're mainly taking electrical engineering classes in your junior and senior year. That is the lion's share. And specifically, if you take like power engineering like I did, you actually specialize more into electrical engineering. And the dichotomy between the renewable energy students, engineering students, and the electrical engineering students was stark, right? Like a lot of electrical engineers, they would even joke and say, "This is like, hey, leave me in a dark room, turn the lights off, give me some work to work on, and don't bug me," right? And even they were even more predisposed to want to work alone than work in groups. You would notice this in labs. There would be a number of just electrical engineers who are like, "I'm going to do this lab by myself," instead of partnering up with each other unless they were forced to do so. So I saw that, which I think reinforces what was the professor's name again? I'm sorry. The writer, the author
The
of the
presenter on that topic.
Oh, the presenter. Yeah, sorry.
Breadth is the new depth. So this is Mike Bechtel.
Mike Bechtel.
And,
Yeah.
I buried the lead on what Mike the hour long presentation. I kind of bury the lead on this because he's talking about the way that artificial intelligence and large language models have the potential for really disrupting our labor arrangement. Because there will be things that physicians, that used to be the domain of physicians specifically, that a large language model or something that's trained in how to spot specific maladies in a scan or a blood sample or a
Yeah.
X-ray. An AI that's trained properly will do that better than a physician more times than not. Well, that might mean that physicians need to be more generalized than they used to be, where it was really paid for them to invest deeply into becoming very, very good at something specific in medicine. I'm using physicians as an example here
No, that's a
because
good.
they're actually way more susceptible to artificial intelligence changing how they are valued in their profession. And we could probably come up with a couple of different professions that aren't medical related, but that an artificial intelligence will actually be able to do a lot better. These might be analysts. These might be people who are involved in investment and banking. This might be, I think that there's going to be some types of design that are just totally taken from human beings and given to robots to do.
Spec writing is the design specification, is the number one target in my mind in the design world, because much of it is so. Real quick, just because if we start talking about design specification and our viewers don't know what we're talking about, that would be annoying. These are the written documents that legally back up the design firm in a contract between the client, the contractor, and the engineer, the consultant. And what these are documents that we create for each of the equipment and the procedures with which how to install and treat everything that has to do with each piece of equipment that we're designing that is going to go into a design. We need to have a design specification. This tells what kind of outer case it's going to have, if it needs to be corrosive protectant. If it's NEMA 4X, for instance, would be a specific type of protective carrier that, with sprayed with a special coating, would protect against ocean water if I'm putting a switchgear on the side of, in Alcatraz, which may or may not be doing that. You don't know. But yeah. Anyways, so these specs, they're long documents. They're generally boring. They have a lot of codes on them, depending on which state, federal, whatever country you're in. They'll have different codes, electrical codes, fire codes, and all the things that are associated with whatever equipment. Much of this stuff is copy paste, because if you've designed one of these systems before, even if it's a new switchgear or a new whatever, you're basically copying a lot of the same information over. I mean, you've already got a template. It's written the way it needs to. You might have to make some small changes. So obviously a large language model, after some easy prompting, would be able to write about 95% of these, and also scrape the internet for whatever codes. If you just type, hey, this is in California or whatever state, immediately it's going to know, oh, I need UL codes this, I need IEEE, I need ANSI, blah, blah, blah. It'll run down the list. So yes, I'm just to back up what you're saying, that easily is a target. And then some CAD design layouts could start to be something with in conjunction with the new survey technology that we're starting to have, where you can link your phone to the cloud with a survey program that starts to map out everything that you basically record, and it'll digitally start to create, a digital footprint, and you could probably start designing from those. And we're not very far from that either. So yeah, there's quite a bit that could be done within the near future, I think, for these LLMs.
So when you think about what that work that human beings would have traditionally been doing, and an LLM can do it, then of course the race to the bottom for every type of business in that spectrum of careers is going to choose a, I call them robots, but it's going to choose an AI or a device or some type of machine that's going to do the work that that human used to do. And Mike Bechtel's thesis is, okay, well, how you future proof yourself is things that these machines can't possibly do, not just because you have arms and legs, but because you have an intuition about the way that things work, like an X shaped professional,
Yeah.
that an LLM can only produce one of the legs of the X, or can only produce a depth of something that contributes to that assembly, but they're never going to be able to produce the insights that come from that X-shaped professional.
So we're coming up on the hour. We're at the hour. To just reinforce why that is, I could say that most likely this is because, one, the amount of compute and semiconductors required to just train an LLM in a specific subsect is massive.
Yeah.
Right now, we don't have
Yeah.
the number of semiconductors even being produced in the world to support the
Yeah.
amount of data that we need to process in each engineering field, let alone like at a
Yeah.
company. So right now at the company I work at, the most useful thing it has is its huge data set of all the projects we've done before, right? Now this
Mhm.
data set is extremely valuable if with an LLM, right? This would be used to train it to specifically design within maybe dams, power line,
Mhm.
distribution, BESS, whatever technology you want. You could start to train these systems, but each individual track would require quite a bit of compute, something that we don't even have the infrastructure for, and therefore the cost for it would be insane. So there's a lot of limiting factors for this spike that people are worried about, where they'll just be jobless suddenly. Because
Right.
frankly, we just don't have enough of the stuff yet to envision that, let alone have something that can generally navigate between these different technological lines. So even
Yeah.
training them up in one data set doesn't mean that they're going to be an expert at all other things that correlate with that technology that we've trained it up on. And that's where the general kind of breadth of knowledge is going to come really useful, because because frankly, these are tools, like Excel was a tool, AI is a tool,
Mhm.
and it will most likely increase the number of workers in some way or fashion, or the number of positions
Yeah.
available for people in the future. It's just we don't know what they're going to be, as they
Yeah.
take people's jobs. So,
Yeah. And this is like there. What I'm hoping to articulate here is this idea that there's some uncertainty in our country about the direction that our federal government is taking. That's just, it's uncertain. I could comment, I have lots of opinions about that, but I think I'll just stop with uncertainty
yeah.
because that's like one of the things that human beings specifically created our giant brains to deal with was uncertainty. That's what we evolved from. That's what we have access to. But then there's this other part, which is technology is moving in a way that, if it can be merged with the direction that our federal government is taking, this could be interesting, I think, to say the least. Disruptive, I think, is also another way I could put this, and
Terrifying.
definitely will change the progress toward equity that I think that we were kind of tuned into doing up until this point.
Hmm.
Because technology can, it's not determinate. It can actually create a lot of equity, but it's not the way it's going to be used. Not that we've observed in the way that the attitudes and behaviors of our um, government system is going towards. So
Yeah.
this is kind of like, it's one part advice, but it's one part just an acknowledgement that one of the directions that we can take as a as a population, as a civilization, is that we can look at ways that we can individually broaden our abilities, then take that broad ability to apply specific things, and that's the value proposition that we offer.
Yeah,
And that way we don't become obsolete because the robots can do our job better. That's the central idea here.
I like it. And with that, I think we're going to call this one right now. If you've enjoyed us talking about education and the future, AI, and all that other dark shit, like, subscribe, and share us. And Richard, I'll see you on the next one. It's been great.
Right on, man. It's been a fun ride. Talk to you next time.
All right. Bye.